Okay, so there's been big news today, and we're going to be talking about this particular big news, but also talking about how it's a story that affects so many of the artists we love, whether it be bands, whether it be solo singers, idols, anyone really in the popular music space is, well, possible to have this conversation about at some time in their career, it seems. And we're going to be using the examples of some bands that we really love, BAND-MAID, BABYMETAL, talking about various things. But the impetus behind this video is this particular face here, because this person, you might not know them if you follow my channel, but this is a very famous person in the very big VTube space. And, well, this particular person goes by the name GAWR GURA. And as you can see, even Google credits her as a musical artist, because a lot of these VTubers, they do many things, but they also release music. There is a similarity between being a VTuber and being an idol in that you tend to have a lot of various things you do, a lot of sort of entertainment you put out on the internet, streaming, videos, social media, but you also release songs as well. Anyway, look, the point is, the big news today is that she, with millions of subscribers, let's see exactly how many subscribers does she have? She has 4.6 million subscribers. She has announced that she is leaving her agency. Her agency is one called Hololive, which is I think it's the biggest in the VTuber space. And like I say, VTube is a massive thing internationally now. It's a Japanese company, and she's leaving. And this message that she left here was kind of like a slightly tearful goodbye, explaining why. So why are we talking about this today? What is the subject, and why are we looking at this particular story of a VTuber who, again, massively famous, but maybe we've never talked about on this channel before? Well, the reason is because it really made me think of something. See, this message that she posted, I'm just gonna go through it, and then you might start to, whether you're a Hololive fan or a fan of the Japanese bands that we often talk about here, you might start to recognize certain things in this. And we'll talk about that a bit more as we go. But basically, I thought, I should say first of all, that this not goodbye, but announcement of the end of her contract, the fact that she was going to be no longer working with this agency, which for VTubers also means giving up your whole sort of animated image and everything, your character name and all of that. This announcement, I thought, was very genuine. I must say, not knowing it, I've never watched any of her stuff before, but, this was a big cultural thing, so I was interested to check it out. And I genuinely thought that the announcement she put out, it sounded very genuine. I think that everything she said it seemed like she was trying to give a genuine account of what had happened. And basically, what she was describing, so she seemingly worked for the agency for several years. Like I say, even though I hadn't watched any of her stuff before, I was aware of her name, super famous. And she was saying, okay, so I am going to leave the agency on May the 1st. I'm recording this video on the same day it should be published, which is the 17th of April. So this is basically in 2 weeks she's leaving. It's very sudden. And she cited a few things saying, well, her main thing she said was, I had a sort of a difference of direction, a difference of opinion with the agency. And as a result, we decided to go our separate ways, kind of like the creative differences thing in a way. And then the last half of the video, or the speech really, she's more talking about her personal side, and she's talking about how she had been under stress, how much stress is involved in working, doing this particular type of work, and how that had a massive emotional effect on her. It had an emotional impact. She was talking about how she'd had trouble eating, how it had caused her, the sorts of stresses that you can get if you're really overworking yourself and these kind of things. But she also said, very interestingly, that she thought this had been a long time coming. And I was very interested by that phrase, because that could mean a couple of things. Now, as you might have noticed, therefore, the thing that we're talking about here is when there are disagreements or issues between an artist and a company. Now, the first thing I want to say here, really, so we've already set this up, but something that I think is really important to point out, and again will inform a lot of what we're going to talk about next, is that if you know me, you'll know that I don't work directly for a record company, but I've worked with management, worked in A&R, I've helped with artist development, I've been there for gigs where artists are playing live, I've been in the studios, I've seen them working with record companies, I've worked with record companies, I've been on tour studios, all these kind of things. I have had a lot of proxy knowledge of how these things work, and with bands and idols as well. This is not to say I know everything, but I've really experienced this on a sort of a day-to-day basis, seeing how companies and their artists relate, especially here in Japan. And the first thing that comes to my mind whenever you hear any of these announcements is that you can always sort of pick through for crumbs of truth, but ultimately the one thing I think anyone who's being honest really knows is that we don't know anything. Most of the time, very little of what is actually going on in the background. And that puts us in an interesting position. Now, I'm just going to quickly slide over to mention about BAND-MAID for a moment. And the reason I'm going to mention about BAND-MAID at this particular juncture, obviously BAND-MAID, very popular band with a lot of our followers here. And this is a band who, just to give you an example, they had a moment last year where they switched from being with their own, being with a management company. They went over to basically self-managing. That was the way it's described. They were going to make their own management agency. They were going to be their own managers moving forwards, which I think we can all agree is a pretty cool thing when it happens. But a lot of people framed that as, oh, BAND-MAID, they're breaking free. They're breaking free of all of the control of the agency. And again, you're sort of hearing this thing where, do people really know what's going on in the background? And I'm glad to say that in this particular case, this is from the BAND-MAID Reddit, and a big thank you to T. Shinji, who actually posted this 7 months ago at the time, but very nicely posted an idea of who the staff were on the album before this change and who were the staff afterwards. And as you can see, like various people who are credited as being their previous agency, Platinum Passport, then end up also being the same people who work in Made It. So, with Made It being BAND-MAID's own self-made management company. So you can see by looking at this that it wasn't like some hostile, we're breaking free kind of thing. It was actually a case of, well, no, they just kind of wanted to consolidate their management. I believe from what I heard, I don't know this, but I heard Platinum Passport, the previous management company, was kind of on its way out. It was dissolving or something, or they just weren't really doing much other than BAND-MAID, and so as a result, it just kind of made sense for them to make their own company and take control of it. But it clearly was not some sort of, oh, we're being held back by our company and now we're emancipated, we're free, we can do what we want. But it was so interesting because around that time, I heard so many people just immediately on the internet, like, BAND-MAID, they're free from this, the company, they can't stop me now. And then people started mentioning all these wild things, and it was like anything that they had been, and but I'm not pointing a finger, most BAND-MAID fans are great, but I saw so many people talking about little things that they'd maybe not liked about BAND-MAID's recent activity. Like it would be like, oh, the last album was over compressed. It's like, oh, well, BAND-MAID have got control, no, that won't happen on their next album. Okay, where did we get this from? And there were some people, like BAND-MAID haven't toured in Europe for quite a long time, which a few people are kind of raising eyebrows about. And everyone was like, well, they must have been held back by their previous management company. They'll be able to tour in Europe now. And it was really interesting seeing a lot of people jump to the conclusion, even before realizing that it wasn't that much of a change of agency, that actually, it was probably more just a change of convenience rather than this massive freeing of themselves from some terrible oppression. I'm not saying that there weren't various things they might have been held back from, but it's important to remember that, a lot of people were assuming stuff before they even knew basic things like the fact that, key staff were the exact same people. It was more of a change of company name and maybe some background practices than, the band being freed from something terrible. And this comes up a lot. People will tend to come to assumptions. One of the big ones that obviously a lot of people will know is in regards to this particular logo and this particular band. So when it comes to BABYMETAL, BABYMETAL are a group who their entire image has like lore written through it. If you've ever seen a BABYMETAL live show, there's like whole pauses with animated videos and like lore drops when they start talking about BABYMETAL traveling through the multiverse of metal and all this kind of stuff. It's great for a show, but it's obviously, this is a group who are very big on the show side of things. And a lot of people, when it talks to them about their management, everyone refers to this name Koba, who you If you know who that is, you're probably already seething. And if you don't know who that is, that's basically their producer, the person who's credited with creating the group. And it's interesting because anytime anything happens with BABYMETAL that people don't like, they're immediately like, oh, it's Koba did it. Koba did it. Yeah, Koba's responsible. And of course, one of the big things is that the former member Yui, who was in the group before, she's not in the group anymore, and they have a different lineup with Momoko. But there were so many people who, when such a contentious subject, I'm like walking on eggshells here. But when Yui departed the group, there was a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of this kind of thing. And again, it was interesting because so much of it was immediately, and people will look for evidence, people will look for proof of things, and people will research, but so often people will know what they want to find and they'll read that into what they see. They'll take the evidence and they'll read it to the conclusion they want to go to. And so it felt like, Koba was the easy scapegoat, and basically so many conspiracies came up like, something with Koba had a disagreement, he did it. And there's so many people to this day who still hate that guy. And I would say we don't know anything about what happens in the background of these groups. It's like, he could be a big figure, but how much actual day-to-day control he has, how much creative control he has, especially when there's other agencies like Amuse involved. And, we've had people saying all these terrible things about Amuse, Amuse, this terrible agency. I hear all these things all the time. Now, why am I talking about this? All because you've got Amuse, you've got Koba, you've got BAND-MAID's previous agency who were, working with them. Every single time there's any sort of breakup or something like this, or some sort of conflict, I'm so used to hearing people immediately go and say, the company's done something terrible. Now, this is where this was interesting, because in the case of this particular announcement, GAWR GURA, I think she made a very honest announcement. But while she was saying it, it kind of occurred to me. There was this interesting thing because, as I say, the last half of this announcement was kind of teary-eyed. You could really hear her upset, talking about, there's a lot of stress and I want to have the best final 2 weeks with you guys. And, this isn't what I wanted. And you could tell there was this kind of conflict. But as mentioned, she said this was a long time coming. She obviously mentioned that there had been significant negotiations with her company, HoloLive. And, there's been other VTubers from the company who've spoken up since because they kind of have to. And it's been interesting hearing what a couple of them have said today in regards to this. And one in particular, Sakura Miko, was talking about how at one point she had felt stressed and she wanted to leave. And, she had a similar meeting to the ones that I'm assuming that GAWR GURA's had, where she sat down with the agency and they renegotiated things. They changed things to make her feel comfortable. And I should point out that Sakura Miko, despite being a huge talent in the company, I think she's got half the subscribers that GAWR GURA has. So GAWR GURA is a huge name. So I don't believe they wouldn't have tried to negotiate with her. So basically what I'm trying to say here is I'm not really discrediting anyone. I'm trying to say here that it seems to me like this is a situation where the company has tried to negotiate, I'm assuming, whatever would be the best deal to keep things going. She's thought about what she wants. Probably building up stress over time might not be a good thing. And they've decided to go their separate ways. And most importantly, we as an audience, just like in so many of these cases, we don't really know the details. We don't really know what happened. We don't know what happened in the background. And yet, when I was listening to her recording, and again, I don't know this woman. I have never watched her videos before. I just know the name. But listening to her recording, even I was kind of feeling kind of touched. I feel really sorry for her. And I think I could start to see, as obvious as it might be, I could kind of see where people get this feeling, because so often an artist, whether it be a band, an idol, a VTuber, anyone in these kind of creative spaces where you work with a talent agency or a company who basically has to manage things, they will have these kind of split-ups or disagreements with the company. And of course, when we hear them, we hear the voice of someone who we care about. a beloved person, especially if it's in the girls rock scene and you're a guy, you know, naturally it's going to make you feel a little bit even more protective, you know, the sort of OG-san, you know, we're thinking about, oh, our little sisters we have to protect, you know. It's like, you can't help but feel protective of them because these are people we care about, we aspire about, we've been following their careers. And the truth is we don't have that relationship with the companies they work for. They are faceless organizations. And so when we see these kind of disagreements, it's so easy for us to look at it and go, bet it was the company. And in your head, you're imagining like that meeting and you're like seeing your favorite singer or something sitting down there, like probably in their full stage gear, trying to negotiate things. And you're just seeing on the other side of the table, just some faceless suits. You know, I can imagine why this mental image is created. And I think this is where we keep on coming back to this idea that every time something happens that we don't like, it's very easy to not put the blame on the artist, but instead shift it to the company. Again, it's been so recent with the GAWR GURA thing, I have no idea if that's what's happening. But there has been, and you know, this is not to say companies won't get things wrong. You know, there have been plenty of record companies in the past who've treated their artists badly, agencies who've treated their artists terribly. And it is interesting because that can happen. But by the same token, there are a lot of companies out there who are really good. And there's probably a lot of artists out there who, you know, do you know what, just in case someone sound bites this, I'm going to just quickly put my channel on the screen so no one gets me saying this next to her. But in the same way that there's a lot of companies who are good and a lot of companies are bad, there's a lot of artists who I'm sure are lovely and a lot of artists who we think are nice people who are behind the scenes might just be spoiled brats. You never know. You never know. So it's interesting because we never have enough information to, and ironically actually the video I've got here was a video I recorded about like how people feel the difference between live and studio music. And a lot of the reason why I think people dislike studio music is every time they hear something which is produced in a way they don't like, they don't think, oh, the artist decided they wanted it to sound that way. They just think, oh, I bet it was the studio. Studio were meddling with it again. Again, sometimes studios meddle with recordings and they make them worse. Sometimes studios give you producers so that the artists can get the sound they actually want. There's always two sides. And yet it's so easy to see the company as the big bad, the big horrible. And so I'm going to repeat a point actually that I made in this video when I'm talking about this, which is just to remember that when you talk about, I can't say this is necessarily the case for something like HoloLive, because again, this is an agency, it's a VTuber thing, it's a very different space. There is a lot of similarity between how like a company like HoloLive works and how like an idol agency works. It's very similar. The idea of having individual talents and, you know, marketing their personalities and their image whilst also having them part of a collective, you know, collaborative things between the people, between the members, and then having songs and stuff. There is that similar kind of talent management thing going on. But what I want to say about these companies is a lot of the time, especially when we look at things like these record companies, like what was mentioned here, it's really interesting to point out that if you ever go and meet these people, so often these are people who work in these jobs, in these record companies, in these music management agencies, because they love music. I mean, they love music. I can't vouch for every single one of them, but a lot of the time that's true. It's not a job you just kind of half the time you walk into. It's like, oh, I got like a management company. Oh, it's something to do with music. It's like, no, 9 times out of 10, you're working there because you love music. Yeah, there's still money, man. There's still things that are going to crush the creative control. But there's so many of these people who work at these companies because that was what they dreamed of doing. I mean, you think about how much you love music. You know, but so few of the people watching this video will have jobs in music. Because, you know, you have to sacrifice a lot to go into those companies a lot of the time. Often, you know, we're doing a management job in music probably half the time doesn't pay as much as doing a management job in an equivalent company somewhere else. You know, it's something where I think there's a lot of love in these companies. Now, again, I'm not 100% protecting these companies. These companies do have bad sides, good sides. But I just think it's interesting how quick people often are to blame the company. When sometimes, you know, I mean, like, for example, BAND-MAID, have they been to Europe? They still haven't been back to Europe. But that might just be a choice that they made. It might just be a scheduling inconvenience. It could be all kinds of things. They might have just forgotten about it. You never know. When we look at BABYMETAL, I'm going to press some buttons here. Did Yui leave under mutually agreed circumstance? Yeah, maybe, yeah, maybe it was just a thing. But did she call time on it because she'd been doing it since she was so young that she decided, you know what, I've been doing this I've been like doing music since I was like 4 or 5 years old or something. I've never known anything else. I want a normal life. It could have been that. Could it have been that the company treated her badly after she had an injury, which she did have, and you know, sort of say to her, "Oh, well, you know, you're not recovering quick enough, so we're going to cut you out of this multi-million-dollar music artist act we have that, you know, is very reliant on having 3 members who are very recognizable, and then we're going to struggle for the next few years with only 2 members." Could that have been what happened? Yeah, I think it seems a bit strange. You know, it could have been all kinds of things. Could it be that she didn't get on with Ma and Sue? Could it be that 3 girls didn't get on that well? I don't think it's so likely, but my point is that you just don't know. So for me, this was, again, like the other video I did quite recently, this was more of a general musing on a topic that I find interesting, that has come up a few times, that I think is worth talking about. And it's that general feeling that we have to have love for the artist. And at no point am I denigrating the fact we have to have love for the artist. I always will put the artist on the highest possible pedestal. And I know that you as viewers will probably do that as well. But I do think it is interesting how sometimes we maybe... It's good to put artists on pedestals. You know, these are the people we want to elevate. This is the whole reason we have channels like this, is to elevate people like this. But I do think it's interesting, and it's important that we don't rush to assume the companies are evil. So, for example, for like Hololive, obviously, I'm pretty sure that GAWR GURA is not a big fan of Hololive at this point. Comes across that way, I don't know, but it's just my feeling. You don't like leave a company if everything's going rosy. But then again, there's plenty of people who are still there who love it. You know, Sakuramiko speaking very positively about the company as she did, and about how they've dealt with the struggles she's had. There's companies like Amuse, you know, where a lot of BABYMETAL fans hate Amuse. But then again, you've got bands like Folia, who are a fantastic band, who've hit brand new stride in their career, seemingly off the back of like working with Amuse. Like straight after signing that contract, suddenly they got the budget and they got like all these things they needed to do their work, and they seem to be loving what they're doing. It's a company, you know. They're not often, unless there's something really systemically wrong, they're often not evil or good. They're just, yeah, they are what they are. And each circumstance is what it is. And yeah, there you go. So anyway, once again, just to repeat, I think that this GAWR GURA, I think her message was fantastically done. This is obviously a massive thing that is currently happening in the news. If you're a fan of VTube music, I cover some VTube music as well here, so I'd love to see your opinions on some of the other things I've covered. If you're a fan of bands like BABYMETAL or BAND-MAID, obviously I bring up these two because they're universal examples I think a lot of people will know. I'd love to know what you think about that. Do you think that, like in the case of BABYMETAL, do you think people are too quick to use this sort of Cobra straw man? Just sort of like, oh, we just put everything there. That name's it's like a lightning rod for people's anger. Do you think that people are too angry at Amuse as the agency behind a lot of these artists? Do you think that, I mean, the BAND-MAID one was more of an example, but do you think that with the case of like BAND-MAID that, you know, when people complain about compression and stuff and all that, it might be that they like the compressed sounding recordings. It's perfectly feasible. They've been doing it for a long time over several record labels. Could it be that, you know, they haven't toured in Europe just because they haven't really thought about it, or just isn't convenient, or they're just more excited about America? These things could be true. We don't like to think these things about our favorite artists. We don't like to think that they would do the things that we don't like, but they're people. Anyway, there you go. Those are my thoughts. As always, this one could be a bit of a contentious one. I'm trying to pick slightly contentious issues as I go, not because I want to piss people off, but just because I think it's very interesting sometimes to raise these topics that often don't get discussed, and just see what you guys think. So, as always, well, actually with the last video, I didn't really come to a particularly conclusive answer here, but I hope I've raised a topic that you guys will be interested to get into the comments and talk a little bit about yourself, yourselves. Anyway, there you go. Take care, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Until I hopefully see you in the comments or somewhere soon. For now, ciao, ciao.